Welcome to Agatha Christie She Watched, our spoiler-heavy look at the movie and TV adaptations of the mystery genre's greatest writer. I'm Bill Peschel of Peschel Press, publishers of the annotated novels of Agatha Christie, and today we'll be talking about emasculating mothers, feckless fathers, bad seed children, and the bomb. It's Ordeal by Innocence, the 2018 version written by Sarah Phelps and starring Bill Nighy and Anna Chancellor as Leo and Rachel Argyle. But first, let me introduce my partner in marriage, as well as crime of the fictional kind, Teresa Peschel. Teresa, how are you doing today?
Hi, Bill. It's always a pleasure to be here with you in your little office under the stairs. And interestingly, the weather outside right now is reflecting the gloomy fall weather that we saw all through Ordeal by Innocence. It is a gray, gloomy day, the sort of day on which you just know somebody is going to get their head bashed in because they had it coming.
Well, it helps it was filmed in Scotland at Ardgowan House.
Well, it's always gray and gloomy in Scotland. There's something about the weather up there. I guess they have sunny days in July.
This is the fifth of 5 episodes, 5 movies that Sarah Phelps wrote.
Yes, we are not watching them in date-time group order, by the way, folks. We watch them a little differently depending on how they fit into our schedule. So I don't think this was the last one she did. I think that one was Pale Horse. Pale Horse was more...
No, actually, ABC Murders.
Oh, was that the last one?
We were watching them in...
Kind of in date-time group order?
Okay, ABC Murders and Ordeal were both in 2018. It's the date on them, at least according to the list I've got.
Okay.
So we were kind of watching them in order, so now I'm looking through the list here just to make sure.
We're always off the cuff, folks.
Right. 2015, and then there was none. 2016, Witness for the Prosecution. 2018, Ordeal by Innocence. 2018, ABC Murders. And 2020 was Pale Horse. So you're right. We did watch Pale Horse because we watched the other Pale Horse movie.
Yes, and we wanted to tie the Pale Horses together.
Yeah.
Because she did. So we've now seen 3 versions of the Pale Horse, all very different and all well worth your time. And now we've seen 3 versions of Ordeal by Innocence, and one of them is truly outstanding. That is, believe it or not, the one with Miss Marple shoehorned in, and that one was just Shakespearean. And I liked Sarah Phelps's version of Ordeal, and then there's the 1985 Donald Sutherland one, which the only reason you want to watch that murky film is because there are lots of boats in it. It depends on how you feel about boats.
Boats and breasts.
And yes, because that one was loaded with gratuitous nudity, because working class girls, by definition in Hollywood, are sluts who put out for total strangers.
Okay. Well, here with Ordeal by Innocence, we are back in the Argyle family.
With gratuitous nudity, but it's all male, so that makes it okay.
Well, it wasn't that much nudity. It was some male chest, and that.
We saw a little bit more of Jack.
Oh, that's right. There was that one scene where he walks into the party naked because he had said he gave his clothes to a tramp. And
yes, and he. Wearing a smile and a jacket in his hands.
Yes, but otherwise the story is exactly as in the book and is in the other versions.
Right up until the end.
We have Jack Argyle, who was the bad seed of the Argyle family, a family of adopted boys and girls, adopted by Rachel, who wanted to do good things.
And she wanted children, and she couldn't have any of her own.
Right, so she adopted 5.
Yep.
And she ends up being killed in the house. And Jack is accused of it and arrested, and he dies in jail this time. He's not executed as in the Miss Marple version.
Yeah, where the Crown hung him, and he doesn't die of. In fact, I think he might have been executed in the
movie,
the Donald Sutherland movie, but I can't remember now. In the novel, he dies in prison of a pneumonia or something like that. But yeah. I do think that executing him was a much more dramatic, much more reasonable answer, because if you've been convicted of murder, the Crown is going to hang you.
Right, and 18 months later, Leo Argyle is preparing to marry the secretary, Glenda Vaughn,
the hot,
secretary,
red-headed secretary.
Yep.
I would not describe her as a blonde. I would more of a strawberry blonde shading into red hair. She was not a blonde.
Yeah.
She was definitely a redhead, and very, very, her costuming, whoever did wardrobe for her, made sure to emphasize her va-va-voom all the way through.
Yes,
and you know
like
why
a bowl
Leo's
of jelly.
marrying her, and you know why she's marrying him.
Mm-hmm. And then appears Dr. Arthur Calgary, and this time he's a shaken man. He doesn't have a car. He's walking to the family house from a long way, walking and taking a bus. And it's 18 months later, and he walks in and says, I know
that Jack didn't do it.
That Jack didn't do it. I had picked him up. And he's told that Jack died in prison. And now things start to kind of veer off in different directions, because in the movie, Donald Sutherland basically just hangs around and insinuates himself into the house,
whether they want him there or not, and he's a very forceful character. The interesting thing about the Donald Sutherland Ordeal by Innocence is it is a Donald Sutherland movie. It is all about him. It is not about the Argyle family, whereas the novel is about the Argyle family. This just tears them apart. This film and the Miss Marple version are also largely more about the Argyle family and how this tears them apart. There are long stretches where Arthur Calgary is not front and center, but in the Donald Sutherland version, well, it's a Donald Sutherland movie, and so by God, he is going to be in every single scene, whether he should be there or not.
In this case, Arthur is drawn into the family by the various children, because he leaves the house, he's intending to leave, and he's visited by Mickey that evening. Mickey breaks into his hotel room
and threatens him. Mickey wants him out, and I thought this was really well handled. This is the first version that I have seen where Sarah Phelps, the writer, thought about what would actually happen if you had a famous murder and the person who committed the crime or the accused said, I have an alibi if only the right person will step forward. You would have loons from across the country showing up on your doorstep claiming that they were the one who gave Jack Argyle a lift at 9 p.m. on the fateful night. And that is another change, by the way, that she made. In all of the other versions, including the novel, it's Jacko, not Jack. Here he is Jack. She changed his name a little bit, and that kind of gives you a hint that his character gets changed too. I thought that was a wonderful addition because, of course, the family is going to be suspicious, and not just because they want Jack to have done it, and it would all be finished and done, and then they don't have to look over each other's shoulders. But you would, of course, had people showing up harassing you, saying, oh, I was the one who gave Jack a ride. I did, it was me. No, it was me. No, it was me. It just reopens the wound every single time.
They did a nice little bit in there as well, where they would ask these people, what were you wearing when you were driving? You say you were going to a party, what were you wearing? Because they knew that was one of those things, they kept that fact out. So that when the first time Arthur Calgary, and he uses the same story, I was in the Arctic for 18 months and I just got back, and here I find this newspaper clipping, and he says because he was going to a party the first time, oh, I was wearing my dark jacket, my dinner jacket, and my formal wear, and that tells Leo, no, you weren't.
You're another liar.
You're another liar. Get out of here. But the family members, there's something about Arthur that gets under the skin of the family members. And I was wondering where they were going with this until we saw Philip Durant, Mary's husband, visit him at the pub and make him an offer he can't refuse.
In all three versions, Philip Durant has changed. I don't remember him in the novel being a poisonous, adulterous jerkwad. I really don't remember that. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just, after a while everything starts blending together. But he is really a nasty piece of work.
He's malignant.
Here. He is malignant in a way that he is not in the other two. And in fact, in this version, he caused his own broken back. Previously, he was in a wheelchair because of his adult polio. But here, he was a drunken, failed gambler who wrecked his car and was carried in on a stretcher back from the hospital on the fateful night in question, the night that Rachel gets killed later on. He is a nasty piece of work. Absolutely poisonous. You wonder what on earth Mary sees in him, except that Mom treated her like a doormat, and so she marries a man who will continue to treat her like a doormat. She is a whipped dog, and as he tells her...
And he's vulnerable as well, because he's trapped in a wheelchair. We see him exercising on the parallel bars, and of course he has a special shower that he has to have, and he takes opium too, which
because
actually comes into play
he's
here.
obviously in pain.
And he's obviously dead from the waist down.
Yes, as Mickey points out, or is it Jack? No, I think it's Jack.
It was Mickey.
Was it
Mickey
Jack
at the table.
or was it Mickey? Oh, it was Mickey at the table pointing out that Philip can't do any of the things that a husband is supposed to do for a wife.
Yes, and that maybe if he was able to, he would be less poisonous.
Yeah, he'd be less nasty.
There's also a note that I thought was interesting about this, and this plays into Sarah Phelps's, I wouldn't say obsession with class, but obviously awareness of it, because Philip had a very plummy upper crust accent compared to Mickey, who sounds like he just stepped out of the Seven Dials area of London.
I didn't notice that.
Oh, it was, if you listen to it, it is very precise and very upper crust, very Oxbridge.
Oh, and there's that wonderful scene where Rachel is getting on Mickey's case when he's a child about how he's not pronouncing the word butter correctly, but Christina is.
Right.
Listen to your sister, and Christina says, butter, and Mickey says bar. And this is actually true to the text. Mickey always remembers where he came from, which was some slum in London. He always remembers where he came from before he ended up in the Argyle household. What I'm seeing is, who is a man here? Because I think about that a lot because of my own fiction. What is a man? What makes a man? And I don't consider Philip Durant to be a man because he has no self-control. He abuses Mary. He is incredibly mean and nasty-tempered to everyone around him, and he assumes that he will get away with it because he's a crippled war hero, but he is not crippled because he was a war hero. He's crippled because he was a drunk driver. Leo, I'm sure, likes to think of himself as a man, but he has no moral scruples whatsoever, and whichever version you see, and the novel, too, Leo has no strength of character. He is a weak man, and he just wants what he wants. He will do what he does in order to get what he wants. And Sarah Phelps amplified that tendency. And Mickey's actually the most manly of the Argyle extended family because he wants to defend his sisters. And he does. His sisters matter to him. And then you get Arthur Calgary, who comes across as a nerdy, weak, creepy guy who looks like he is going to be the last person picked for every game and the first person to get beaten up. But he wants to do what's right, and he has more strength of character than Leo does, by far.
Well, the reason why, as we learn, is that, and again, I'm really kind of impressed with how well all this works out. Arthur Calgary was a physicist, and he worked on the atomic bomb that was used apparently in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Although he didn't actually look old enough because this took place in like 1954 and he would have done it 10 years earlier, and he did not look like a physicist in his 40s. To me, he looked like some geeky 25-year-old. So this is where casting really needs to consider the age of the actor, because he didn't look old enough for that to me. But that was the idea, is that he was one of those physicists who helped make the atomic bomb, and of course he's tearing himself apart emotionally because, oh my God, he had to kill people by making the atomic bomb, to which one can only say, well, maybe you should read up on the rape of Nanking. He needed to end the war.
He could also look up the history of Operation Olympic, which was the invasion of Japan, and you had hundreds of thousands of American soldiers, and I guess from other countries as well, preparing to die in the hundreds of thousands because Japan was still a fighting power. They were still preparing. They were willing to die to the last citizen, and it was going to be a grind like they've seen on Tarawa and Iwo Jima and all the islands they had up to that point. And the atomic bomb, yes, horrible, but war is horrible. War like you say, horrible. You just look at Nanking to see what the Japanese had been doing for 15 years before that.
Yes, and there is a reason why in all throughout Asia there are still plenty of Asian citizens of whatever flavor you care to mention who loathe the Japanese.
So there's that, and to get back,
and you forget this stuff. You forget this stuff if you do not read your histories.
Yeah. And if you only listen to the activists, who of course are not going to tell you all this, you have to look into the whole of history. History is a continuum. It doesn't start from year zero, no matter how much they want it to be.
And it is messy.
But the bomb overshadows everything here. There's a big bomb shelter. in the house that they built. There's a radio broadcast that talk about what you should do if the bomb falls. I don't remember any particular crises that would allow for this sort of thing, but it was in the air at the time. It was
in the early 50s, and
it was Korea. It was after Korea, somewhere around the mid-50s.
So I think people, there was a lot of anxiety about nuclear warfare at the time. There was a huge amount of anxiety, and in fact, for those of you who were paying attention, you may have noticed that Arthur Calgary had a novel called The Chrysalids by John Wyndham. And John Wyndham wrote, you could almost call them cozy catastrophes. When, like Agatha, there's a lot of passion and there's a lot of violence, but it is very nicely written so that you are not wallowing in the pornography of violence. And The Chrysalids is a future novel, a novel that takes place long after the world has basically blown itself up in extensive nuclear war, and how much genetic damage was done. Huge amounts of mutations, terrible, terrible mutations, and in fact, human children had to be evaluated. In this particular part of the world, it's like Newfoundland. When a baby is born, they have to be evaluated to see if they are whole and not deformed, because if they are deformed, they're drowned. Or you have to be smuggled out into increasingly radioactive areas where life is short and brutal and deeply unpleasant. And there's a new form of mutation in the chrysalids of mental telepathy. It doesn't show physically, but it is in the wiring. And the story is told from the point of view of a boy who he hits puberty and his mental powers start to wake up. And if his family finds out, if his community finds out, he'll be killed because he is no longer human. And they have so much genetic damage, so much problems that the only way they can keep human stock relatively clean and undamaged is if you don't look human, if you were deformed in some way, they kill you.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that.
Oh, it's a great novel. Chrysalids is a great novel, and I'm not sure if it was filmed. Some of the John Wyndham stuff was filmed. I know the Midwich Cuckoos was, and I guess we'll have to put them when we do
science fiction
and beyond.
The science fiction review book. Okay, yes, definitely. We'll make a note for that.
Chrysalids is a really good novel. I remember it very clearly. I've read it a couple of times, and it is the novel that Arthur is reading, and it was a novel that a lot of people at the time would have been reading. And I think it is correct for the period. It's so hard to tell, when something was published in 1952, and there you are reading a modern paperback in 1982, and unless you look at the copyright date for something that's set in the future, you have no idea when it was written.
Right. So Arthur was being buttonholed by Philip.
Yes.
With the idea that Philip needed money.
Philip needed money. He's kept on a very short leash, and he has no money of his own because, of course, he's a gambler.
Yep.
He's mooching off the family and abusing the family and abusing his wife. And again, why Leo didn't throw him out is beyond me. Mary's brothers don't like him.
Mm-hmm. But the idea is that Arthur would continue making his statements. He'd go to the police. There would be big publicity over it, and Leo would pay him to go away, and he'd split 50-50. So this is what keeps Arthur hanging around. And finally, Mickey catches up with him like the next day when he approaches the house and hustles him aboard a train.
And Arthur decides to come back because he has to. He just has to do the right thing. And this is when he runs into, I think he makes phone calls. I can't remember now.
That's right. He
meets Bellamy. He meets Bellamy Gould, who is a friend of Leo's.
But he's a police detective, though. In fact, he investigated the case.
Yes, and he proved that it was Jack's fingerprints mixed with Rachel's blood.
Jack's bloody fingerprints.
Bellamy Gould tries to run down Arthur, misses, and then rams his car into the wall, throwing him face first through the windshield. Gruesome scene, killing him. As you watch later on, you realize why Bellamy Gould did this. It isn't spelled out, but it's there if you want to find it. And this is where Sarah Phelps starts making Ordeal by Innocence her own story and not Agatha Christie's story, because Bellamy Gould apparently wasn't just the chief constable. He was also on the board of trustees for some charity or other that Rachel ran. Jack accuses him of buggering little children, neglected little children, and Jack is also carrying on a torrid affair with Bellamy Gould's wife. Bellamy Gould is Leo's best friend, and somehow or other Jack's fingerprints are mixed with Rachel's blood on the decanter, as though that was what was used to kill Rachel. Jack accuses Leo of what's going on, of the truth, in prison. The next day, he is beaten to death, which is exactly what Bellamy Gould had threatened him with.
Right. All this is being told in flashback. So over the 3 hours that this series runs, we learn a little bit more because, of course, in the beginning, when Jack is arrested and Leo talks to him in prison, you get bits of their conversation. And then in the end, you get the missing spaces in between and you learn exactly why, for example, Jack spat at Leo and laughed at him.
Yes, and you have to reevaluate everything you've seen before. Again, this has the same problem that the ABC murders did. It can be tedious if you are watching all 3 hours at the same time, one after the other, boom, boom, boom. Whereas if you were watching the way it was designed to be presented, this week, next week, and then the week after that, where you have a week in between, you need to do a lot of flashbacks and flash forwards because you're reminding the audience of what they saw last week, overlaid by an entire week's worth of events.
The big difference, though, is that here there were a number of different flashbacks as opposed to the ABC murders, which just had that one, the soldier.
No, we saw other ones because there was also...
there was the house party. There was the house party, but the one was just that same one that was done over and over and over again. There was very little information given each time, but here it's a lot more effectively done.
Yes, was a lot more effectively done, and you still had, there were still moments when I'm thinking, get on with it. But again, watching the 3 hours one after the other is very different from watching them well separated by a week.
Another interesting aspect of these 3 versions is the role Rachel Argyle plays, because in the Donald Sutherland movie, which Faye Dunaway played, we saw very little of her.
Except that she was a very unpleasant woman. She was an unpleasant woman. It was her way or the highway. All throughout, Rachel Argyle is an unpleasant, controlling woman. She is not, however, like Mrs. Boynton in Appointment with Death. She is not evil for the sake of being evil. She wants everything to be exactly right. She wants it to be her way. She will not tolerate any deviance from what it is that she wants, but she is not evil by her own light.
By her own light. She's not cruelly torturing her children.
Even though
at the end...
You watch her insisting that Hester have an abortion. Hester's unconscious. She demands the doctor perform an abortion on Hester because Hester had married some lowlife. And I think the abortion was wrong, but I think that Rachel was perfectly justified in her opinion of Hester's new hubby because she gives Hester's new hubby a check for £500, which is nothing. And he says,
1956? 1952?
Add a zero, $5,000. And he just says, okay.
They live in kind of slummy quarters, and yes,
he takes the money and he just walks away. He abandons her.
Yeah.
Abandons his new wife, his beautiful new wife, his pregnant new wife, without a second glance. Doesn't even look back. He says, oh, £500? Okay, I'm out of here. Rachel's not wrong in pointing out that this man is a loser. He is totally not worth Hester, but Rachel is also really not a pleasant person. She is not.
Yeah, but like you said, she drugs Hester, right?
She drugs her, gets her out of there, takes her straight to the hospital to find out, because of course she's been with this guy for a couple of months. So it's very possible that she is knocked up, and she is.
Yeah.
Rachel is horrified and offended that it turns out that Mickey and Tina are having an affair. Well, they are brother and sister, folks, and I can see any mother would be horrified and appalled. But they are also adopted. They have no genetic connection whatsoever. They know they're adopted. They know they come from different birth parents. But at the same time, I see why Rachel is really not happy about this. But Rachel also tells us that when Mickey was off in Korea, she prayed every morning and every night that he would come home safely. And I think she meant it. We don't know. We never get any view of what Rachel actually thinks.
But there are times when one of them approaches her for a hug. Mary wants to hug her, and she goes, "Oh, don't do that. This is not what we trained you to be."
Rachel doesn't like being touched, and she assumes everyone else doesn't like being touched.
Yeah.
There are people like that. They don't want to be touched, and they don't tolerate it well. And it looks cold and unfeeling. It comes across as cold and unfeeling. But some people really are wired that way. But how do you do that with children who need to be touched?
Yeah. There are just some women who just really shouldn't be mothers.
There are some women who really shouldn't be mothers.
They have no maternal instinct whatsoever, and shows it.
I'm afraid so. Yeah. I'm afraid so. Some people just shouldn't. Some women shouldn't be mothers, just like some men shouldn't be fathers.
Now, they've also made some changes here as well, especially near the end, which results in, I think, really a much stronger story, because we find out who Mickey's mother is.
No, not Mickey. Jax. We
find
out who Jack's mother is.
Oh, Jack's mother. You were correct.
And it is Kirsten. So if you remember the novel and you remember the other two films, Jack and Kirsten, the middle-aged housekeeper, had a torrid affair with young Jack because Jack had a almost magical ability to get older women who were lonely to do what he wanted. And so it was Jack encouraging Kirsten to murder Rachel. And it was, even though Jack didn't actually hit Rachel in the back of the head, he didn't break her skull open himself. He is the reason why she was murdered, because he incited it. But here, Sarah Phelps rewrote the murderer, and I can't believe I'm saying this, I didn't have a problem with it. There have been times, ITV is really bad for this, with the Marple series where they rewrote who the murderer was, and I wanted to throw my popcorn at the screen. But this worked. Leo, who has always been a worthless cad, Leo murdered Rachel. Leo set up Jack. Jack is his son when he raped 15-year-old Kirsten, who had been hired as a mother's helper to help with Mary, who was then a little adopted child. Leo did it. Leo murders Philip Durant, Mary's husband. Leo helped set it up with Bellamy Gould to frame his own unacknowledged son because he wanted to get away with murder. Why did Leo want to get away with murder? Not just because he was a weak man, but because you realize that Rachel's the one with the money. And Rachel had had enough. She walked in and discovered, after one damn thing after another, on the same day she discovers that...
It all boils up.
It all boils up at once.
Right up to the run-up before Christmas. I don't know if it was it Christmas Eve?
It's sort of I think 1 or 2 days before Christmas, but it was very close. So on that fateful day, the day that Rachel is murdered, Jack confronts her and says, I know that Kirsten is my mother, and that apparently Leo raped her. That's not spelled out, but you know that is because she was 15, which was never supposed to be told happens. Kirsten confronts her. You said this would never be find out. Jack tells Rachel that Mickey and Tina are carrying on an affair. She had rescued Hester from the bad marriage and then insisted that the baby be aborted. And
it was a long day.
And Philip comes home on a stretcher, his back broken, and they're having to call him up a flight of stairs on a stretcher. And Mary is fluttering about, we have to make sure we've got a room on the ground floor. And then Rachel discovers that Gwenda, the secretary, is riding Leo. Like a seaside donkey. It's just been one damn thing after another. And
Wasn't there something else with Mary getting hit in the face? Didn't she slap Mary?
Yes, I think she pushed Mary away. Mary wanted somebody to pay some attention to her and give her some physical affection.
Yeah.
And she pushed Mary away. So Mary is deeply unhappy too. And then Leo confronts Rachel. You don't want a divorce. And Rachel looks at him and says, yes, I do. I am divorcing you. I have had it. And she's the one with the money. So why does Leo kill her? Because he doesn't want to be a failed writer with writing books that will never get finished. And if by some miracle he actually finishes that damn passion project that has been taking for years, nobody will ever buy it. It will never be read. It will probably not even be published. And if Rachel divorces him, he loses everything.
It's amusing to note that in this one, he's an archaeologist, an amateur archaeologist, writing a book on, and he has a desk that was apparently raided from the Adventure of the Egyptian Tomb episode from Poirot. All the Egyptian artifacts from there was carted in for this.
Yes, everything that the prop department made there is recast here.
But it's a nice nod to Agatha's second husband, Max Mallowan, who was an archaeologist. And Agatha would do the same thing in her books as well. She would kind of playfully make the criminal an archaeologist in one of the books. As kind of like a little in-joke to her husband. It's nice to see that it shows up here as well.
Oh, yes. This really worked. After the ABC murders, I really didn't know what to expect. I was thinking, God, this is going to be an ordeal, a 3-hour ordeal. But it worked. I don't think this was as good as, I can't believe I'm saying this, I don't think this was as good as the ITV version where they shoehorned in Miss Marple, which I loved that movie. It was a tragedy. Now here you have a whole lot of very unpleasant people, and you don't feel that it is an emotional tragedy. Even though it is, it's a tragedy for everybody concerned. But the ITV Marple version centered on Gwenda, the secretary, and she was not no better than she should be. She was not a slut. She was not a tart wearing cheap knickers. You know, Miss Marple had taken her from the orphanage and trained her as a housemaid and said, get some schooling, you can do it. Gwenda goes off to become Leo Argyle's secretary. She falls slowly in love with her boss, and she falls in love with the family, and they're so wonderful, and she's marrying Leo, and it's the happiest day of her life. And then Arthur Calgary shows up, and the family turns on her instantly, and there's this wonderful scene where she's trying on her wedding veil in front of the mirror, and you can see all her happiness has turned into ashes in her mouth. The family turned on her just like that, like snapping your fingers. And Leo, who is supposed to be this wonderful judge of character, this philosopher who talks about how important ethics are and good behavior, and he can't throw her out to the wolves fast enough. What a louse.
I felt the emotion from that story.
Yes, much more so than I did here, because I think Sarah Phelps started off with the kids being too unpleasant. You didn't get a feeling for how relieved they were. And see, this is where making Jack not the villain removes some of the pressure on the rest of the family. The rest of the kids, they can't believe that Jack did it. They all had reasons to hate Rachel. Whereas in the novel and in the other two film versions, they're relieved that Jack is dead. And they're not surprised that Jack murdered Rachel, because this is exactly the kind of thing that either he would do or he would urge someone else to do. But here, it's more complicated, so you don't get that clear sensation of, this is a tragedy. And it was. The ending worked for me. I didn't necessarily work for Bill, but the ending worked for me.
It was uncharacteristically commercial. The children discover that Leo killed Rachel. They find a piece of Egyptian sculpture. In fact, Kristen did. Kristen finds a piece of Egyptian sculpture that has blood in it.
And I looked at that and I thought,
18 months,
after 18 months, you didn't go back in and clean that or put a little bit of black paint over that? Anything! Come on! Don't you read detective novels?
Well, it's also blood doesn't work like that, but never mind that. They end up confronting Leo. The children do, all four of them plus Kirsten, and it goes back and forth, and then it jump cuts to the end of the pier where there's this lake with police boats searching for Leo's body.
Yes, and there's his little boat. This is one of the very few boats you will see in here. It's a very nice red rowboat called Anubis on the side. You know, taking you on your journey into the underworld.
Right, and there's Gwenda in her wedding dress saying, we were so happy, I don't understand why, and Mary, none of the children tell her, of course.
Yeah, none of the children tell her, and the girls are in their bridesmaids' dresses. He is wearing his suit, and they're not what you would call supportive of Gwenda. They loathe Gwenda. They all loathe Gwenda. They have loathed Gwenda from the day she showed up and started riding Dad like a
side pony. That's a line from the episode, which is one of the few funny lines in this episode.
And then you discover
what actually happened to Leo
is why they built a bomb shelter in the first place behind a heavy locked door.
Because remember, all throughout, we were seeing Kirsten go downstairs and unlock this heavy door, and we didn't quite know what it was, except in the middle of the second episode, we learned, it's the bomb shelter. Apparently, there's these rows of bunk beds so that the whole family could go down there.
I can see why Kristen went into the bomb shelter. She could close the door behind her, and it's a soundproof room.
Yeah, because she wanted to basically cry and scream her frustration.
Cry and scream from the overwhelming stress, from how she was treated, 1,000 different things. She is those children's mother, by the way. She's their emotional mother. She's Jack's physical mother, and she's all 5 kids' emotional mother in a way that Rachel could not be.
All this is like it's a build up to a punchline. This is a punchline. It is a Sarah Phelps joke.
Yes, that Leo is now entombed in the bomb shelter, alive, trapped. And somebody periodically, I guess they have to give him, I guess he's eating sea rations and using the little toilet container, whatever, because they had enough money they could build a very nice bomb shelter. And it's surprising how many people in the 50s did build bomb shelters. Don't be surprised that a big English castle like this would have a bomb shelter in the basement. They've got catacombs for basements, so you've got the space.
Yeah.
And there's Leo entombed. And what is he? He's an archaeologist. He's an Egyptologist. Of course, he's going to be entombed.
Right. That's right.
Eternity with Anubis.
That's right. That's right, because Kirsten goes down the stairs and looks in the window, turns the light on, so he's in the dark. And she turns the light out, and he's just by himself, solitary confinement until he finally, and screaming, ineffectually.
Let me out.
And that's how it ends. Which actually, I was shocked at the... And
it circles around very nicely to Arthur Calgary, because remember, Leo figured out that Arthur admitted that he had actually been in a mental asylum, because he had been unable to cope with the guilt of, oh my God, I'm a nuclear scientist. Oh my God, I've done terrible things. Oh my God, I might have saved the lives of 1 million American troops invading the Japanese islands, and how terrible that is. All of those people should have died instead of Japanese citizens. Arthur admits that he has been in an asylum.
Mental asylum for 18 months.
And then Leo turns on him. The kids are trying to save Arthur. They know what's going to happen. They know that Dad can't be trusted, but Arthur... is really not very bright. And he doesn't listen to them. He goes upstairs to get his case because it's the only thing he has in the world. And of course, Leo has arranged for the asylum attendees to show up, a couple of big burly orderlies and the doctor, to shoot him up with sedatives and cart him off to the asylum, where he is going to be entombed in the crazy ward. And then the kids turn around and do the same thing to Leo.
Right.
So you have juxtaposed, you have Leo in the bomb shelter, locked in, and you have the kids rescuing Arthur from the asylum.
Assuming that, because we just see their Rolls Royce pull up, and they get out and they wave at Arthur in the window, and then they fade away, and we don't know what actually happened. Maybe he's staying in there, and because he wasn't taking his lithium.
He had stopped taking his lithium. We see a scene where he's smashing up his lithium, but... It wouldn't surprise me, and I will take this ending, that Arthur moves in with them. They've got the room.
Yeah.
Arthur moves in with them. That would allow also Hester to have her happy ending with Arthur, which is what she does in the novel.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh.
She goes off with Arthur.
Oh, well, and I could see that, because he's not violent. He's just vaguely confused.
Yes,
just
but
comes off as...
he wants to do the right thing.
He wants to do the right thing.
And he is probably far more of a man than the one she actually married, who for 500 pounds said, yeah, I'll dump my pregnant wife.
And they have all the money, because Leo is presumed dead, so they inherit the house and the fortune.
Everything.
So, happy ending all around.
Yes, it is. It's a happy ending all around. Except, of course, that Jack was beaten to death in prison, but Jack is vindicated to his brother and sisters.
Right.
And Mary no longer is married to that worthless
Philip Durant.
Philip Durant, who is a cheating, lying, failed gambler and a drunk, as well as abusive. So, yes, Mary's happy too.
Yep.
Everybody's happy.
Everybody's happy. Now we come to the end, and I was wondering how, I have no idea about what the Sarah Phelps episodes were like, except I know that traditional Christie fans despise them. And now we've seen all 5 of them, and I must admit it, I think she's 4-1.
Yeah, I would say 4
Maybe
and
4-1-1.
The ABC Murders, the underlying plot was Agatha Christie, but that was a Sarah Phelps production from start to finish. The witness for the prosecution, she really enhanced a 20-page short story. But again, there were things in there that I didn't like because...
The unrelieved gloom really got to me.
The unrelieved gloom. And we think what we see, we're very influenced by what we see and the stories we tell ourselves. And you get these stories over and over and over that say, every single person you meet is a liar, a cheat, a pedophile, a vicious, cruel bastard, and you stop trusting anyone. Every single policeman you meet is corrupt. Every government official you meet is corrupt. Every grocer is trying to cheat you. Why would you have any social trust at all after watching a Sarah Phelps movie marathon? You wouldn't. You would have zero social trust, even within your own family, because within your own family, they're all murderers and liars and cheats and adulterers and everything else that you can imagine.
But contrast that with Agatha, who had always talked about through her characters that anybody can be motivated to murder.
Yes, anybody can be motivated.
They can be kind. They can be generous. They could be good.
Yeah, there are very few genuinely caring, kind people in Sarah Phelps productions. And if you like that kind of thing, it works. And I think she did a good job of introducing Agatha Christie to a new audience. And no, they are not Agatha Christie stories necessarily. They are Sarah Phelps stories. But in the immortal words of James M. Cain, and I'm going to misquote him, the books are still there on the shelf if you want to read them.
Yeah.
They are there on the shelf.
And there are even previous productions to watch. You can watch the ITV version of Ordeal and enjoy it.
And wonder why Miss Marple isn't in the book when you sit down and read it.
Yeah. So all in all, I am impressed. When she wrote well, she fires
on all cylinders.
She fires on all cylinders, and sometimes she steers into the ditch like Bellamy Gould.
Oh, yeah. And the other thing about this, of course, that you have to say is she's the writer, and we know her name. With any film production, whether it's for TV or for the movies, the writer is the person you don't know. You know the director, you know the actors, you know the actresses, you know the producer. Heck, you may know, depending on how much of a fan you are, you may know who the costumer is or the cinematographer. You don't know the writer.
Yes, we don't know Stuart Harcourt, who wrote Ordeal by Innocence in 2007 for Geraldine McEwen.
Yeah, we have
talk
no
about
idea.
a Stuart Harcourt production. Poor guy.
Yeah, we never talk about that.
So, any last thoughts?
I think that this is not as good as the Marple Ordeal, but it is infinitely better than the Donald Sutherland Ordeal. The score was much better, too. You didn't have that bizarre, intrusive, completely inappropriate score, a very jazzy Dave Brubeck score that had nothing whatsoever to do with the film.
Oh, right. That was something. They had a problem with the original score, and they hired Dave Brubeck, and he said, I don't have enough time to write anything original. Let's just cobble together pieces from
And it didn't fit. It was completely jarring.
I forgot about that.
I enjoyed this. And the other thing I want to say is we do a lot of events, and we've got a couple of events coming up for the next few weekends. So if you go to our website, peschelpress.com, we have our events. And if you want to meet us and talk about Agatha Christie and discuss Sarah Phelps's efforts, we'll be there.
This closes another episode of Agatha Christie She Watched. I am not really sure what we're going to be watching next.
Is it going to be Why Didn't They Ask Evans?
It could be, yes. It could be, and it could be Death on the Nile, too. They're both 2022. So we'll find out, folks. Tune in again next time on Agatha Christie She Watched. We'll see you at the movies.
Bye-bye.
Agatha Christie She Watched is Teresa Peschel and Bill Peschel. Produced by Bill Peschel. Theme song, Call to Adventure by Kevin MacLeod. New episodes come out every week wherever you stream your content. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can help support us by going to anchor.fm/mystery and leaving a 5-star rating and review, and by helping to spread the word. To advertise on Mystery She Watched, email Peschel at peschelpress.com. All questions and comments can be emailed to Peschel at peschelpress.com. And thank you for listening.